The sterile air in the bank lobby felt colder than the February wind outside. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the chill that seeped from the polished marble, from the hushed tones of the tellers, from the absolute, devastating silence that had fallen over the man crumpled on the floor. He was clutching his chest, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling, a soundless gasp trapped in his throat. Around him, chaos was a slow-motion wave, figures in sharp suits freezing, a security guard fumbling for a radio. But for me, the world had narrowed to this one tableau. Him, broken, at my feet, and the low, steady voice of my attorney on the phone I still held pressed to my ear. She had just confirmed it. The transaction was frozen. The money was safe. And he, the man who had tried to steal my future, my security, my very sense of reality, had just collapsed. The silence in the lobby was deafening, but inside my head, it was louder, a triumphant roar, cold and sharp. He had thought he was untouchable. He had thought he had won. He was wrong. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. It feels like a lifetime ago now, the woman I used to be. She lived in a world built on solid ground, on the kind of trust you just assume exists, like gravity, like the sun rising. Our life wasn't flashy, not the kind you see in magazines, but it was good. It was built, painstakingly, brick by brick, dream by dream. We had met young, both of us with more ambition than money, with a shared vision of a comfortable future, earned through hard work and careful planning. He was charming, back then, full of life, with a quick smile and eyes that crinkled when he laughed. I saw a partner in him, an equal, someone who would walk beside me through whatever life threw our way. And for years, he was. We worked hard. I was a graphic designer, freelance for a long time, then built up my own small agency. He was in finance, climbing the ladder slowly, steadily. Every extra dollar we earned, we saved. We lived below our means. We invested wisely. We denied ourselves luxuries today for the promise of security tomorrow. That money, the money he tried to steal, wasn't some sudden windfall. It wasn't inherited wealth or a lottery win. It was 20 years of sacrifices, of brown bag lunches instead of eating out, of staying in on Friday nights, of choosing sensible cars and modest vacations. It was the sum total of our joint effort, our shared discipline, our combined hopes and dreams for the future. We talked about it constantly. The future. Retirement. Maybe a small place by the coast one day. The ability to help family if they needed it. The peace of mind that came with knowing we were secure, that we had built a buffer against whatever storms life might bring. That money represented freedom, safety, the culmination of our life's work together. It was the bedrock of our shared existence, the physical manifestation of our partnership. He looked at me sometimes, across the dinner table, or while we were watching TV, and his eyes would hold that familiar warmth, that look of shared history and unspoken understanding. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew us. I felt safe. Utterly, completely safe. It was a naive safety, a fragile glass globe I lived inside, unaware of the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first crack was so small, so insignificant I barely registered it. A late night at the office, becoming a regular occurrence. A new phone, aggressively password-protected. A subtle shift in his demeanor, less engaged, more distant, his eyes holding a faraway look I couldn't decipher. I attributed it to stress at work, the pressures of his job. I tried to be supportive, to give him space. I told myself he was just tired, preoccupied. Love, or maybe just comfort, can be a blindfold. The inciting incident, the moment the glass globe shattered, wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a tearful confession or a confrontation in a restaurant. It was quiet, mundane, and utterly devastating. He left his work laptop open on the kitchen counter one morning, rushing out the door for an early meeting. A notification popped up on the screen, an email preview. Just a few words. Something about confirming receipt. Something about the transfer. And then, a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name. Followed by an amount. The number was so large, so utterly out of place in that context, that my brain initially rejected it. 950,000. My breath hitched. My hands started to tremble. I clicked on the email. And then another. And another. The emails weren't love letters. They were cold, transactional, detailing bank accounts, transfer dates, confirmation codes. They were correspondence between him and this woman, confirming the logistics of moving a colossal sum of money from our joint savings account to her private account. There was no emotional language, just the chilling efficiency of a financial transaction, executed in secret, with surgical precision. And through the dry, technical jargon, the truth screamed at me. He was giving our money, the money we had worked 2 decades to build, to another woman, his mistress. The name was linked to a few earlier, more personal messages, brief, clandestine arrangements, confirmations of meetings. Nothing overtly affectionate, but the context was undeniable. This wasn't a business deal. This was betrayal, calculated and complete. The world tilted. The kitchen, moments before familiar and comforting, felt alien and hostile. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed too bright, too cheerful for the darkness that had just enveloped me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, the words on the screen blurring through a sudden, hot flood of tears I couldn't hold back. 950,000. Gone. Or going. To her. The woman whose name I hadn't known existed moments before. The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw emotion. Shock, disbelief, a pain so physical it doubled me over. It felt like being punched in the gut, repeatedly, until all the air was knocked out of me. I stumbled through the day in a daze, performing the necessary tasks, feeding the cat, getting dressed, on autopilot. Every movement felt heavy, disconnected. The emails were seared into my mind, flashing behind my eyes whenever I closed them. The number, the name, his cold, deliberate act. Confrontation felt impossible at first. How do you even begin to confront someone who has shattered your reality so completely? I felt paralyzed by the sheer scale of the betrayal. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't form. My throat was tight, my chest ached. Instead, I started watching him. Everything I had overlooked before now stood out in stark relief. The furtive glances at his phone, the sudden need for privacy, the strained politeness between us. Every interaction felt like a performance, a play where I was the unwitting, oblivious audience to his secret life. Sleepless nights became the norm. I would lie awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, a vast chasm opening between us in the darkness. I would replay every moment, every conversation, searching for clues I had missed, for signs he had given. Had I been blind? Had I been foolish? Or was he just that good at deception? The questions circled endlessly in my mind, a relentless torment. I started losing weight, my appetite gone. My colleagues noticed I was quieter, more distracted. I put on a brave face, mumbled something about stress, but inside, I was a hurricane of conflicting emotions, hurt, anger, fear, despair. The fear was the most potent early struggle. Fear of losing everything. Not just the money, but the life we had built, the identity I had as half of a couple. Fear of the unknown future. Fear of the legal complexities, of the daunting task of trying to reclaim what was rightfully ours, what he had so casually given away. I felt adrift, untethered, in a sea of uncertainty. My first instinct was preservation, damage control. I didn't confront him, hoping to buy time, though time for what, I didn't know. I thought about calling the bank myself, but I had no idea what I could even say, what power I had as an individual. I felt helpless. The rising challenges came quickly, escalating the crisis. The husband, perhaps sensing a shift in my demeanor, or perhaps just emboldened by his perceived success, became more brazen. He started mentioning business trips that seemed suspiciously timed. He became impatient, irritable, snapping at me over trivial things. The money had clearly gone through the initial stages of transfer, The emails confirmed it was processing. The dread coiled tighter in my stomach with each passing day. The thought of that money, our money sitting in her account, being used by them, was like a physical sickness. I tried to talk to him, skirting around the edges of what I knew. I asked about his stress levels, about our finances in general. He was dismissive, deflecting every question, his eyes cold and distant. He had become a stranger, a polished facade over a core of deceit. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the profound violation of trust, the years of lies laid bare. It felt like he had erased our shared history, spitting on every sacrifice we had made together. The mistress remained a silent, shadowy figure in the background, a constant, burning presence. I imagined her, faceless but potent, benefiting from my loss, from my husband's betrayal. The thought fueled a quiet rage that simmered beneath the surface of my despair. How dare they? How dare they dismantle my life so carelessly? As the days passed, the feeling of helplessness intensified. It felt like I was watching my life savings drain away, drop by agonizing drop, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I researched online, trying to understand international money transfers, tracing funds, legal recourse. The information was overwhelming, confusing. It all pointed to one thing. Once the money was in her account, getting it back would be a long, arduous, potentially impossible legal battle. The window of opportunity, if there even was one, was closing rapidly. Then came the midpoint shift, the moment the paralysis broke. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, burning realization that crystallized into cold, hard resolve. I was sitting alone in the house one evening, the silence amplifying my despair. I looked around at the things we had accumulated, the home we had built, paid for with that very money. And I saw it not just as a house, but as the physical representation of my life, my effort, my worth. He wasn't just taking money. He was trying to take my future, my security, my dignity. And in that moment, the victimhood evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to be the passive, heartbroken wife left with nothing. I had worked too hard. I deserved better. The thought wasn't just about getting the money back anymore. It was about fighting back. It was about asserting my agency, my strength. It was about refusing to be erased. The despair gave way to a cold, clear focus. I needed help. I needed a weapon. And that weapon was legal strategy. The turning point was calling the attorney. Not just an attorney, but the attorney. I asked around discreetly, reached out to contacts, looked for someone known for being sharp, aggressive, and effective in financial cases, particularly those involving complex transfers or potential fraud. I found her, Ms. Evelyn Reed. Her reputation preceded her, formidable, meticulous, with a steel-trap mind and no tolerance for BS. Walking into her office felt like stepping into a different world. It was sleek, professional, quiet. Ms. Reed herself was exactly as described, sharp gaze, precise movements, a calm, authoritative presence. I laid out everything, showing her the emails, explaining the joint account, the sum, the timeline. As I spoke, the shame and fear began to dissipate, replaced by the power of articulating the facts, of building a case. Ms. Reed listened intently, asking pointed, relevant questions. She didn't waste time on emotional platitudes. Her focus was purely strategic. The key, she said, her voice low and steady, is time. If that money completes the transfer, it becomes exponentially harder to recover. We need to intercept it. We need to freeze the transaction while it's still in transit, or immediately upon arrival in the recipient account, before it can be moved again. She explained the process, contacting the banks involved, filing emergency injunctions, leveraging anti-fraud regulations. It was complex, required speed, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in weeks, I saw a path forward, a chance. This wasn't just hoping karma would strike. This was taking action, wielding the system as a shield and a sword. The decision was made in that office. I hired her. The papers were signed. The retainers paid. There was no turning back now. I had launched my counteroffensive. The period that followed was the deepening crisis, a gut-wrenching test of endurance. Ms. Reed moved quickly, initiating contact with our bank and the recipient bank in the other country. The process was bureaucratic, fraught with delays, requiring specific legal filings and justification. Every hour felt like a day, every day a year. I lived on edge, jumping at every phone notification, every email alert. The tension was a constant, dull ache behind my eyes. My husband, meanwhile, seemed to grow more anxious. He was still operating under the assumption that his plan was proceeding unchecked. He would check his phone compulsively, his brow furrowed. He mentioned finalizing the deal soon. He had no idea that the wheels of a different kind of process were turning, set in motion by the woman he had so carelessly discarded. He was walking blind towards a cliff edge. There were moments when despair threatened to overwhelm me again. What if the banks were too slow? What if the money had already landed and been moved elsewhere? What if his legal maneuverings, whatever they were faster or more effective than ours? The uncertainty was a suffocating blanket. I felt utterly powerless, having handed over control to Ms. Reed and the slow, unpredictable machinations of the legal and banking systems. All I could do was wait and try not to break under the pressure. It was the lowest point, feeling the outcome was entirely out of my hands, that despite my resolve and my lawyer's efforts, I might still lose everything. The potential loss wasn't just financial anymore. It was the loss of faith in justice, in fairness, in the possibility of recovering from such a profound wound. Then came the plot twist, the moment his carefully constructed world imploded. Ms. Reed had advised me to be near a phone, to be prepared for news, good or bad, at any moment. The bank, she said, was reviewing the transaction, flagged now by the legal request. It was a delicate balance, providing enough information to halt the transfer without prematurely tipping off my husband before the freeze was legally secured. He was at the bank. He had gone in person, something about finalizing the transfer, signing some physical papers that the recipient bank required. He had been strangely chipper that morning, almost celebratory, mentioning plans for new beginnings, with a dismissive wave of his hand that felt like a personal insult. He believed he was hours away from completing his theft, from starting his new life with her, leaving me and our shared past behind, financially ruined. He was at the pinnacle of his deceit, utterly confident. He called me from the bank. His voice was smooth, condescending. "Just finishing things up here," he said, the implication hanging heavy in the air, finishing us, finishing the transfer, finishing my life as I knew it. He was rubbing it in, enjoying his victory. I kept my voice neutral, a tight knot of tension in my stomach. Okay, I managed. Then, the phone went silent for a moment. Not dead air, but a strained, sharp intake of breath. I heard a muffled voice in the background, a bank employee speaking firmly. And then his voice suddenly different. Confused. Strained. What? What do you mean? Frozen? That's impossible. The words hit me like a physical blow, but not of pain. Of pure, electric shock. Frozen. It worked. My attorney. The bank. It happened. His voice rose, frantic now. Frozen? By whom? You can't just freeze. This is a legitimate transfer. There must be a mistake. I stayed silent, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence returned, punctuated by frustrated muttering from his end and the continued low, firm tone of the bank employee. He was getting the details. He was finding out why. And then, the gasp. The absolute, soundless gasp that told me he understood. He knew I was behind it. He knew his plan had been intercepted, not by chance, but by my deliberate action. His victory had turned to ashes in his mouth at the very moment he thought he had grasped it. He was completely blindsided. The climax arrived moments later. He was still on the phone with me, though he wasn't speaking to me anymore. He was arguing with the bank employee, his voice escalating from frantic disbelief to sputtering rage. "You have no right. This is my money. Who authorized this? Who filed this injunction?" And then, Ms. Reed's voice cut through the background noise, clear and sharp, from the phone still pressed to my ear. She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to the bank employee, confirming details, solidifying the freeze. He must have heard her name, or heard the context of the legal action. The legal action initiated by me. His sound on the phone changed. The rage vanished, replaced by a guttural sound, a choking noise. There was the clatter of the phone dropping, a thud, and then silence. Absolute silence from his end, broken only by startled voices in the background. My hands were shaking. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it. Ms. Reed was still talking, her voice calm and professional, confirming the legal standing of the freeze. The bank employee's voice was now panicked, calling for help. I looked up, instinct guiding me, and saw him. He was in the lobby, visible through the large glass windows from where I stood on the street outside, having waited nearby at Ms. Reed's suggestion. He was on the floor. People were gathering around him, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. He was clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain or disbelief, or both. His eyes, wide and vacant, seemed to be staring right at me, though I knew he couldn't see me through the glare on the glass. He had planned to walk out of that bank triumphant, his pockets soon to be lighter but his mistress's account heavier. Instead, he had walked into a trap of his own making, sprung by the woman he thought he had defeated. The physical collapse was, in a morbid way, the ultimate expression of his blindsided defeat. His body giving out under the weight of his shattered plan, his exposed betrayal. The aftermath was a strange, fragmented reality. The immediate chaos in the bank lobby led to paramedics arriving, flashing lights, hushed questions. I stayed back, watching from a distance, a detached observer. Ms. Reed met me outside, her expression serious, but with a hint of grim satisfaction. "The funds are secured for now," she confirmed. "The bank has placed a hold based on our filing and the evidence presented. It will likely move into a contested state, possibly an escrow account, until the legal matters are resolved. This precipitates a divorce, of course." A divorce. The word hung in the air, both inevitable and surreal. The life we had built was definitively over, not just emotionally, but legally and financially. My husband was taken to the hospital. I didn't go. I felt no urge to rush to his side, no flicker of the old concern. All I felt was an immense exhaustion, a hollowness that was slowly being filled by a cold, quiet sense of vindication. He had tried to destroy me, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. His physical collapse was a dramatic, perhaps even fitting, consequence of the pressure and shock of his plan failing so spectacularly, so publicly, and at the hands of the person he least expected. The legal process was long and arduous, as Ms. Reed predicted. The $950,000 became the central point of contention in the divorce proceedings. His attempt to move the funds secretly worked against him, seen by the courts as an attempt to fraudulently dissipate marital assets. The mistress, surprisingly, vanished from the picture almost immediately after his collapse. Once the money wasn't easily accessible, it seemed her interest waned. A harsh lesson in the cost of loyalty, perhaps, for him. In the end, after months of legal wrangling, discovery, and negotiation, the money was mostly recovered. It wasn't a clean, easy win. There were legal fees, compromises, the emotional toll of reliving the betrayal over and over in depositions and court filings. The final settlement wasn't the fairy tale ending of walking away with everything and skipping off into the sunset. It was a legal resolution, a distribution of assets, a formal severing of ties. The money returned to me wasn't the same as the money we had saved together. It was tainted, marked by his deceit, a constant reminder of the depth of the betrayal. But it was mine. What he had tried to steal, what he had tried to give away to another woman, was returned. The strategic fight had worked. The cold logic of the legal system had undone his emotional, albeit calculated, act of theft. Walking away from the courthouse the day the divorce was final felt anticlimactic. There was no fanfare, no sudden surge of joy. Just a quiet relief, the lifting of a heavy weight I had carried for too long. The life I had built with him was gone, irrevocably broken. The trust was shattered beyond repair. The innocence I had lived with for decades was lost forever. But I had survived. I had faced down the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that strikes at the very foundation of who you are and what you believe in, and I hadn't crumbled. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed, a cold, hard core of resilience. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to emotional devastation isn't despair, but cold, calculated action. The money sits in a separate account now. I look at the balance sometimes. It represents security, yes, the future we had planned. But it also represents the battle I fought, the victory I won not just against him, but against the part of myself that wanted to give up, to accept the loss, to be a victim. He collapsed when his plan failed, when he was finally exposed. I stood up, hired an army of one, and fought for what was mine. The scars remain, the memories of the betrayal still sting, but they are tempered by the knowledge that I didn't let him win. I turned the tables. I fought back. And I won. It's a cold victory, perhaps, but it's mine. And the future, uncertain as it is also mine to build, on ground that feels shaky sometimes, but is at least free of lies. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.